Hello, I'm going to be showing you how to make a little house that you can put a tea light in or an incense cone so it smokes out the chimney. And these are lovely and festive but can be used any time of year. And as always, there's lots of different ways of making with clay, but this particular technique I'm going to be cutting from blocks of clay. So I'm just cutting from a bag of clay these two rectangles. And then I begin to shape them. So I start slamming them and patting them onto the table. I'm using a loop tool here. It's a ribbon loop, but you can also use a wire loop. And I've marked out the square at the top where I want to cut down from. And then I'm just scooping out all this excess clay. And this clay won't be wasted. It will either go to add some features onto my little cottage, or I'll wedge it back up and use it another time. So I'm just using a kind of more pointed end of a loop tool, and I'm just going into those corners. You can check the depth of the bottom too by using a needle tool, making sure that it's not too thick, and then smoothing all of that down with my fingertips. And you've just seen that I've gone through there, so I'm using a little bit of slip and plugging it with a bit of clay. And that is the real beauty of using clay, is you're playing with a lump of mud. So if you make a mistake, repair it. So I'm just refining all of that, making sure it's nice and smooth, because if you're putting your fingers in and out of there whilst you're putting a tea light inside or an incense cone, you don't want any snagging bits to catch you and potentially cut your fingers. So I've grabbed the second rectangle of clay, and this is going to be my roof. And I've just slowed the video back down to normal time so that I can talk you through the roof. I'm going to check that the roof fits and has an overhang over the base of my house, and so I'm starting to slam that down and squish it down. And of course you can use tools like a rolling pin and make a much more precise shape, but I really want this to have that cobbled, whitewashed, rickety old kind of cottage feel to it. I found the best tool for the next step is a smooth metal kidney, and I'm just marking out the lines where I want to cut from. So I've got a centre line and then two side lines that are about 2 centimetres from the edge, and then I'm using the kidney to cut through the clay, and it gives a nice smooth straight cut. And here I'll show you with a wire, which you can use, but it doesn't quite give the same nice flat shape. You can see that it's got more of a kind of ski slope shape to it, which is fine. I'm just cutting that down so that it's a bit more similar to the other side. And then using my kidney again, I'm going to do the front of the roof. And then turning it so that I can do the back of the roof. And I've gone for a lovely low cottage shaped roof, but you can obviously do a taller roof, a more rounded structure. You can shape it any way you like. So I'm just popping that on, and it doesn't look quite like it's naturally fitting for the moment, but that will change. So you just want to check there's a bit of an overhang, that it's going to work size wise, before I then hollow out the roof. So I cut into it using another loop wire tool, and I'm just scooping out that clay, just mindful that there is an angle with this one, so I need to go into a point, a kind of triangle shape inside. And I smooth that all off with my fingers. So I've decided that you can see me running my finger along that it's too high. I want a squat little cute cottage. So I've just cut the top off, and you'll find that you'll do this with your cottage. You're going to really refine the shape, keep looking at it, cut bits down, add bits on. And I'm doing the same with the roof. So I want it to overhang a little bit more. I want it to have a more natural feel on top of the base of the building. So I'm just sculpting that a little bit more, pushing down the edges, smoothing it down, and there we go. I feel a bit happier with that shape. I've slowed the video back down again so I can show you how to make a chimney. So I've cut off some of the excess clay and I'm patting the clay into an oblong shape of a chimney. You don't have to have an oblong shape, you can have a round one or a crooked one. But I want my chimney to be hollow, so something that's straight is better for that. And then I also am going to cut one end nice and flat and straight. So I've got a nice neat chimney, and then cut an angle at one end where it's going to sit on my roof. So it's a bit of a guess, and you can always recut the angle. And I want it on the side, although I'm just going to test to see where I want it. You can always move things around. And these are my hole tools. So they're hollow tubular tools that when you push them through the clay, they take a nice neat plug of clay with them, so they make a nice neat hole. So you don't need one of those to make a hole in your clay. Obviously you can use anything else that will kind of push through the clay, but these are nice and quick. But here you can see that I'm just cleaning them out because the clay gets dry in them, and I'm only human. I don't clean all my tools all the time. So pushing that through, I'm making a nice hollow chimney. And actually I'm showing you my second attempt at a chimney, so if it doesn't work out in the first instance, then you can always make yourself another chimney. I'm using a bit of slip, and I've scored the clay where I'm going to put it down and on my chimney. Put some slip on there, and then I'm sticking that to my roof. And you want to make sure that's a nice firm push down fixing. And I'm scooping out my hole tool again to go back down and then through the roof as well. And you can go in through the other side, but obviously this is easier. You can see where you're going. So now I've got a chimney that reaches from the outside to the inside. Now you can add windows or turrets or towers or anything you like on your house, but I'm going to add on like a nice cute little kind of thatch style window into the roof. And I start shaping the clay. So I've taken some of the excess clay and I'm going to use that. And I need it to sit on the angle of my roof. So I start patting it down onto my table. I start with making a cube and then rocking the top of it so that I get the top arch of my window. So I've made sort of like a polytunnel. And then I cut an angle so it will sit on my roof. You can see that I'm testing what angle to cut it at. And again, if this is wrong, you just do it again. Like I'm doing here, I'm going to cut a little bit more off. And then that can sit on the front of my roof. That looks really cute already. And then to shape my window, I'm going to use a loop tool, and this one's a wire loop. And I'm just creating a window frame, so I'm taking some of that away. So that the window itself is going to be a bit more recessed into the clay. And then I score this and score the roof and stick that on. However, there is another way of doing that, which is to hollow this out now and cut a hole in your roof. And either way is okay, but possibly hollowing this out and then cutting a hole in your roof so it covers the hole will give you a little bit more candle light that will come through that upper window. So I'm just going to make sure the seam where the window meets the roof and just around that overhang is all nice and nicely shaped whilst it's on my roof. And then I'm going to use a small hole tool just to poke through my windows. Now I have got some square hole tools which are quite nice for making this and makes life a lot easier, but if you don't have one, then just use a hole tool or any kind of tool that will go through, just to give yourself those holes at first. And then I start shaping them. So I'm using a square loop tool, and then also my little dentistry tool which has got a flat square edge, just to shape those into little squares. And they're not perfect squares, but I don't want them to be perfect. I'm thinking rickety old witchy cabin. Moving on to the windows and doors, I'm just rolling out a flat piece of clay. Now I'm rolling out quite lightly so it's not sticking to my table, but if you find that it sticks to your table, then use some fabric underneath your clay. And I'm sticking on what will become the door frame onto the front of my little cottage. And I'm then marking out where I want my door to be and peeling that back to create my doorway. Now at this point I hadn't decided whether or not I'd have an open doorway or I was going to leave the door shut and just have light through the windows. So for this next bit I'm making the window frames. So again I'm slipping and scoring them onto my building. And wiping away any excess slip with a paintbrush. And then I'm going to cut through my 4 holes for the windows. And then neaten those up with my tool that's kind of got a flat blade on it, which gives me the square shape of my windows. And you can see me there taking some of the clay out as I go and wiping it on my hand. I'm a classy kind of potter, me. And annoyingly, this is where my camera decided to stop filming and I hadn't realised. So I made another little house so that I could finish my video for you. But I left it a bit long, so it's quite dry. So you can see here that I'm really kind of scratching out these windows, and I'm showing you a slightly different technique for making the windows, where I've done the big squares on the house, and then I've got this new nifty little tool that cuts window squares out, which is a bit of a game changer for windows, but I don't make that many, so really this is a tool for my students to play with. And then I'm just scoring round the windows, adding some slip, and then just popping those windows over the top, and they are very large because I want them to make sure that they cover those big square gaps on the side of the building. And I cut them down to size and give them a good press down. And as you can see, as I say, the clay is a little bit on the dry side, so these for me might peel away, but as long as you don't leave your clay to dry too long, yours should be fine to stick down with a bit of slip. So for this next bit, I'm thinking about the candle that's going to go inside my tea light holder, my tea light candle, and also my incense cone. So for the incense cone here, I'm just creating a little wall for the incense cone to sit within, and also this kind of like little slot, like a post box slot on the side next to where the incense cone will be, and this is for ventilation. If you don't get enough ventilation for your incense cone, then it will just go out. So this sits down low next to the cone, and together with the space through the windows and the door and the chimney, that should be plenty of ventilation. And this is a little wall, so the reason why I do a wall is not just to keep the cone standing upright, but also because the cone creates a lot of downward smoke, particularly when you first light it, and that smoke will start escaping out the windows. So that little wall just funnels it upwards towards the chimney. And here I'm showing you a slightly different way of doing a window for the roof as well. I've cut a hole with my new star cutter, so I've got a star-shaped window at the top on the roof as well. It looks really sweet. Now, I've also used this opportunity to show you a bit of texturing that you could do on your house. So you might notice that this roof of my latest house is a little bit different. It looks more like a thatch roof. And I've had these other textures on the other roof. So I created a little mini roof to show you how I made those textures. And the first one, I'm using a rounded loop tool just to scoop out the textures that I have on that second house there, and then also using a couple of different tools to create the thatched roof look, which could be a scoring tool or a serrated kidney. And then another texture I like on this clay is to use a little ball ended tool just to kind of knock into it and create a nice dimpled effect. And then this one is rolling up balls of clay and just smearing that back end of the ball onto the side, and you create this nice little tiled effect that looks super cute, and under glaze I think would work really well. So I always think with textures, that's what you're aiming for, is something that's going to look really lovely under glaze. It's going to pick up all your markings and show a little bit of the colour of the clay underneath, particularly with this brown clay. And here's the final piece of my original house. I managed to film that bit, and you can see that the chimney is drawing up the incense smoke beautifully, and inside we have a little candle. And how cozy does that look? As this is stoneware clay, I left that to dry completely and then bisque fired it. I then painted it in Amaco Potter's Choice Honey Flux glaze. You can even use some gold nail varnish to add some extra blingy touches to it. If you enjoyed this video, then please do let me know in the comments below and subscribe. If you make your own house, then find me on Instagram and share your pictures with me.